Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the founder and chief inspiration officer of Highlander Press. As an author, she has written the book You've Written Your Book, Now What?, which is a nonfiction book for authors, and she is also a contributing author to the nonfiction anthology book Heart-Centered Marketing. Her name is Deborah Kevin, and here's my interview with Deborah. Deborah Kevin, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
That's correct. Thank you.
Welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
I'm so happy to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. My name is Deborah Kevin, and I am a publisher, an author, and an editor who lives in Baltimore, Maryland, although I'm a born and bred Philadelphia girl. I love books. I have loved them since I was a little girl. And I love the whole process of discovering a wonderful book and then bringing it all the way through the editing and publishing process to get it into the hands of the readers.
You're the founder and chief inspiration officer of Highlander Press.
Yes, I am.
What type of publisher is Highlander Press, and what genres of books does Highlander publish?
Sure. So Highlander Press is a mid-size hybrid publishing company. And so what that means is that there is an author investment upfront, but we do have a submissions process that we evaluate the manuscripts that are submitted with our editorial team and decide which ones we know we can do really well with. So the kind of books that we have published are obviously some nonfiction titles, really focused kind of on thought leadership and memoir. We've got a couple of poetry books in the works, well, two in the works and one that we've published. We're in the fiction area now. That is my area of expertise, and I love fiction. So we have 7 fiction books coming out this year. Most of them are, well, half of them are YA, the others are sci-fi and fantasy. We have a biography on the docket this year. So we have, the only thing we really are not comfortable with are erotica and real, what I would call super religious focused books. So spirituality, I'm all in, we're all in, but hardcore evangelical kinds of books are not a good fit for us.
What motivated you to start your own publishing company?
It's a great question. So interestingly, I started out my career as a CPA and an auditor in some big 6 companies, couple of big 6 companies. And I was good at it. I was competent and actually I would say excellent, but I didn't love it. And what happened was every company that I worked for, everyone would bring me their presentations or their reports or their emails to read and edit and make them sound better or help them, kind of coach them through the process. So I was doing that work all throughout my career. And in 2010, my youngest son was diagnosed with autism. And at that point, I was working for a Fortune 250 company and in a senior leadership position. And I needed to take a break to focus on him. So I left my corporate job temporarily, I thought, to really get him stabilized, become well-versed in the language, and recognize where I wanted him to feel like he was an awesome person. And so we spent about 3 months working toward that goal. And then I realized I couldn't go back to the corporate world. I literally was making myself sick to my stomach, even thinking about it. So I, for the first time since I was 16, stopped working outside the house. And so, but I kept myself busy. I was doing all sorts of certification courses, learning all about the autism world and different kinds of methodologies for bringing out the best in my son in particular. And I started writing for myself. And I started meeting with a couple of friends who were also writers. And then I got an invitation to submit to Stanford University. And I put my proposal out there thinking there's no way anyone will ever take me. And so out of almost 300 applicants, they chose 35, and I was one of them. And so I was in a 2-year novel writing course that was really essentially a master's degree in how to put together and write a novel. Now, most of my peers had completed novels. I did not. So while I was learning, I was frantically creating and writing, because at the end, we actually were paired with published novelists of acclaim who would then mentor us for our last semester. All this to say, I was dabbling in books, but in the meantime, I started taking the skill sets that I'd learned in my corporate career, and I started building websites for other authors. And it was like, okay, I get to a point where either I need to learn a lot about website building, like the coding part of it, or I can focus on the words. So I doubled down on copywriting, became an excellent copywriter. And then something funny happened is I was in a business mentoring program, and we were encouraged to publish books, like really lead gen books. And a bunch of my colleagues did that. I did not. And the output that they got, they went with a vanity press that had been recommended by this business mentor, and the books were terrible. I mean, they were they weren't edited. Basically, it was someone doing a recording and then just putting it on paper and slapping a cover on it that wasn't even a good cover. So they came to me and they're like, "Can you fix this?" So that's how I really got from where I was to where I am. But what I realized was at some point, I loved the whole process. And because of my background in business and also in process improvement, I could see a different way for authors to experience the publishing world. And that's what I created.
Other than yourself, who are some authors who have published books via Highlander Press?
Yeah, so there's we have quite a few. So we have I'm trying to think of so we have Jill Celeste, who has written 2 books, who published 2 books with us. Um, One is Loud Woman and one is Your First Client. And she's got a novel that I know she's written, and I'm hoping we'll publish the third one. Sherry Andrews has written a legal book for small business owners to kind of demystify um, small business legal requirements and make them more accessible. That's called Smooth Sailing, and we're working on the second edition of that. We've published a book by an incredible poet called What Color Am I? It explores race, gender, male and female experiences. Just wonderful poetry book. We've done a book called The Selfish Hour, which was written by an author named Megan Weishapel. She's a business coach for women, and really how she reclaimed her power in that process. We've published a book called Peace in Passing, which is a book to help animal lovers say goodbye to their pets in a very loving way. It's full of really wonderful stories. That's by Mary Beth Decker. We've published a couple of anthologies. Our most recent anthology is called Heart-Centered Marketing, which features 21 women entrepreneurs who share their nurturing and attraction marketing strategies that they use in their businesses. And they're wonderful. It's a wonderful book. We just had just last week two number ones in different categories on Amazon during that launch. So those are just a smattering of an example of the books that we publish.
You mentioned heart-centered marketing, and one of those contributing authors was you. Without
Yes.
spoiling too much of heart-centered marketing, what is it about?
So it's really written. It's 21 women who wrote to specific topics. So the book is broken down into, I believe, 5 topics. I don't have them memorized, but one of them is mindset. One of them is sales. Um, really some the collateral that you need to be a successful business owner, like how to make your graphics not be homespun, but have them look professional before you have the chance to maybe hire somebody. My book was all about why I believe women in particular need to write their stories because we can inspire other women. So there's all these different marketing techniques that are out there that can help other women, but also men who don't want to do those bro marketing, techniques and sales, real aggressive sales tactics. So that's what it was done for. That's who it's written for. And I'm super proud of the book. It's a gorgeous cover. It's designed by Hanna Broter, who is a Norwegian graphic designer that we use pretty frequently at Highlander Press. She did all of our website and our branding.
You've written a short nonfiction book titled You've Written Your Book, Now What? Without spoiling too much of that book, what is it about?
So as a publisher and an author, I go to a lot of conferences. I participate in a lot of summits. I do a lot of talking about the publishing world. And so I started noticing that I was getting a lot of the same questions. And they all related to publishing because most people think of publishing only in the traditional sense, like you're not a real author if you only publish in this way. And I wanted this book to give guidance and encouragement to people who wanted to either independently publish or just be knowledgeable at a very high level about what the publishing industry is and how to make their books do well in the marketplace. Because honestly, I use this all the time. This is not the field of dreams. If you write it, they don't find you. You have to actually let people know where your book is and how to find it.
Have you written other books other than the two I've asked you about? And if so, what are some other books you've authored?
So I've submitted a lot of essays to literary journals. 166 Palms has several different anthologies there. I've submitted stories to anthologies, one called Courageous Hearts, one called Shine, Reliving, uh, Reclaiming Your Midlife Mojo. I also authored two novels, one of which will come out this fall. I write YA historical fiction. So I have one that I'm in revision and then one that's in the process of being released in the fall of this year. It's called Finding Grace, and it's actually the novel that I wrote in my Stanford University program.
What are some books that you've been involved with as an editor, and what types of book editing do you do?
So my specialty, I'll answer the first question, the last question first. My unique brilliance is in developmental editing. And so because of the way my brain works, I can see how a book can be most effectively put together, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. I can see, is this book a frame book? Does it need to be a braided story? Um, where do we want to add more stories? Where do we want to take more facts away? What is not being said that really ought to be said, like in a memoir kind of a situation? So I'm an excellent developmental editor. I don't do copy editing or proofreading. We have people on our team who handle those skills. You definitely don't want me proofreading your book. And some of the other books that I've edited, I actually ghost wrote a book called The Monsters Family, which is a wonderful memoir by a gentleman named Andy Funk about his journey from his brother being diagnosed with cancer and losing his battle at age 20 to kind of the fundamentals of how he and his wife created the most successful hip hop dance organization in the world. Like if you've ever seen a Beyonce concert, Taylor Swift concert, most of those dancers, even like the Super Bowl dancers, most of those dancers have gone through their program. And so the company is called Monsters Inc. And so this is the Monsters family because everybody who works in his family literally works in the business and also the people who go through the program tend to become family. So it's a really unique perspective. I'm looking over I've edited a book called Your Brand Boxes, which is a book for people who want to learn more about graphic design. That's been edited that was written by our graphic designer, Hannah Broder, and it's absolutely gorgeous. We've published children's books. We had the first of a trilogy come out last year. The second book is coming out in May of this year, the third in October of this year. It's called Words of Whimsy, and it's about introducing children to different kinds of words through story. So the first one was called Betty Bartholomew and the Vanishing Begonias. So there's an era of mystery, an aura of mystery, and there's always a unique animal. Takes place in a really cute neighborhood with Miss Oboe as one of the featured characters. I'm looking over. I have edited several books for other publishers. The Art of Self. I'm looking at my bookshelf, so please bear with me. Oh, one of my favorites was Carrying My Father's Torch by Gail Gaspar. This book is part memoir. It's mostly memoir about how she's a second generation Holocaust survivor. Her father, who passed away last year, had been imprisoned in Mauthausen concentration camp, which was a concentration camp that I visited with my children in 2017. And I came back from that trip and I knew that I really wanted to work in the area of Holocaust survivorship. And Gail found me somehow and I book coached her and edited her book. And it's an absolutely brilliant book that is in the Mauthausen Library. It's also in the American National Holocaust Museum, and it's in the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Israel, just to give a few.
You host a podcast called Storyteller with Deborah Kevin. What can listeners expect from a typical episode of your podcast?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Thank you. Storytell Her is a relatively new podcast. It just launched in February. And the intention is really to help women recognize themselves in other women's stories. So it's Storytell Her with an H. And it's intended to just be a conversation with other women. Some of them are authors, some are business owners, or some have, I'm not cataloging it by what they do, but really about who they are. And so I start the podcast with just one question. And it's been amazing to me in the podcast episodes that we've recorded, just where the conversation goes based upon that one question. And of course, we always wrap it up with a wonderful book question. And so listeners can, I hope that they take away some inspiration, that they see themselves in other women's growth through challenges, that they see the possibilities that they may not have ever considered, and they can just have a good laugh. Like, I really hope that it's like kind of cuddling up with a new best friend on the couch with a cup of tea and having a chat.
I apologize for getting the name of your podcast wrong.
That's quite all right. I mean, it's an unusual name, but the H is kind of significant.
Okay. You mentioned earlier in the interview that you have an autistic son. What is it like raising an autistic child?
Well, so can I brag on him for a moment? My
Go right
son,
ahead.
he was 10 when he was diagnosed, and he's high, he has, low now he has low support needs, but at the time he was really struggling. And, it was an entirely different perspective. And so he's just recently graduated from college. He's got a dual degrees in psychology, but his primary degree is in animation. So he is actually now working in a company where he is working with little children who have been diagnosed with autism. So he just brings a really unique perspective. He's thriving in his career. He moved out and to his own place. He's just knocking life out of the park. And some of that, I think, is the way that we approached his diagnosis, but 100% of it is his determination and, learning to advocate for himself at a young age. And so some of the things that we did differently was we were doing really 4 days a week, different therapy, talk therapy, occupational therapy, um, physical therapy, all these different therapies. And one day, and I have an older son who, as a single mom, I had to take him with me. So his, part of his childhood is just going from appointment to appointment. And one day we were coming home, and from the back seat, Jack said to me, "Mommy, am I broken?" And it was everything I could do not to pull over and just burst into tears, because this was the last experience that I wanted my child to have. So I assured him he was absolutely perfect. He was made absolutely the way he was meant to be made. And I made it my mission to make sure, first and foremost, that he knew that if nothing changed, he was still perfect. And so we rearranged everything. Instead of us going to other people, I got certified in a bunch of different therapies. I got mentored by some incredible people. And we built a playroom in our house that my son, after school, would go in, and we would be in there for a couple of hours, and he was in complete control. So if he couldn't be in control in other areas of his life, it allowed him to unpack whatever was going on in a supportive and holistic way. He says now that that playroom was an oasis for him. And we had the therapies come to us as opposed to us going out of the house, which just changed everything. I also made it my mission to educate teachers, because I believe teachers want to do the best job that they can with their students, but they don't get a lot of support in this area, and they see limitations. Like, immediately people were putting limitations on my son, and he's brilliant. He's funny. He's empathic. And so I went in every school year and met with each of his teachers one-on-one, and I gave them kind of the primer on autism in general and autism as it shows up in Jack, so that they could be supportive to the best of their abilities to support him in what he needed so he could thrive. So it was hard. There were days that were exhausting, and I felt like I just didn't know what I was doing. And, I did a lot of battling. So there was a lot of that kind of energy, but I don't regret any of it. My son and I are both of my son, we're very close. And I know that I did my best to give him the foundation to thrive in his life.
I was diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And I've never really had an opportunity to live anything resembling an independent life. I'm glad your son is able to. In my case, my dad had a massive heart attack when he was a teenager. I mean, when I was a teenager, rather.
Oh, goodness.
He was in his 50s. And he had permanent brain damage the rest of his life. And then a few months before my dad died, my mom became very ill, and I spent a lot of time taking care of her. So I've been basically a caregiver of sorts since I was a teenager.
I just want to give you a great big hug, because that's challenging under any circumstances. And so I wouldn't say that you're living independent. You're not living independently. You're just choosing to be a very caring son. And that's a really hard place to be, but an incredibly loving one. So maybe reframe that for yourself. You are living independently. You're actually caring for another human being.
One final question, and thank you for telling me that. But one final question: there's on your website is an other fun facts listing, and one of them is that you love old typewriters.
Yes.
Why do you love old typewriters?
I don't know, but so I'm very drawn to history. I write historical fiction. I read a lot of historical fiction. I love documentaries about the past. And I think that there's something kind of romantic about the clickety clack and the big round keys and the manual effort that it used to take, like the physical manual effort that it used to take to write a book. Right now we live in a world where we do things on our computers, and we have all kinds of tools that can support us, spell check, that kind of thing. And we can edit things very quickly. But to make changes, I just feel like there's just something so solid about a typewriter. And I do love them. And I think it's that I'm drawn to the history of them. The original name for a typewriter was literary piano.
I had never heard that term used for a typewriter until now, but I kind of makes sense because the keys on a typewriter sort of vaguely like piano keys.
Exactly, right?
Deborah, thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus. You were an amazing guest.
Oh, well, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And I'm so happy to have met you and have had this opportunity to talk with you about some of my favorite subjects.
It's always amazing to learn about the book publishing world, and I thank Deborah for appearing on this podcast. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.